We are going to hear the Beatitudes again. We heard them in the prayer. We're going to hear them from Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12, from the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, the disciples came to him, and he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you whom people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Thanks be to God for these words. My grandson once told me that I always tell stories and speak in the past. And I guess I probably do more than I speak in the present or more than I speak about the future. I would have to assume that this is typical of my age, more in the past than what's ahead in the future. So I have to start out by saying, back in the day, many years before my retirement, I served on a committee for MSAD number 1. It was the Vision and Mission Committee. So we were developing a mission for the school and a vision of what we wanted our students to be. And you know, we have lofty ideas when it comes to those things, perhaps even more so than reality. But one of them that stuck in everyone's mind was that we wanted to inspire our students to be lifelong learners. That was a big thing. Well, I can't tell you if we inspired the students to be lifelong learners. There's one lifelong learner right there. Good. Thank you, Fred. However, we inspired the teachers, most of them my age now that I think about, to be lifelong learners. And that comes out in more ways than one when you're on the worship ministry, because you have to learn what you don't know and then stand up here and talk about it. And I think that's why we say delivering the message, not what the ministers say, like proclaiming the word. No, we're delivering the message because we hope you will reflect with us each Sunday and perhaps research the chosen scripture a little bit further on your own. So Matthew, who is our gospel writer for year A of the liturgical calendar, introduces Jesus' ministry. We started out back in the day, back when Jesus was baptized. Then we moved on to when he was confronted by Satan. And now we're moving on to when he's beginning to teach his disciples. Believe it or not, this is the first time they've been called disciples in the gospel. I never knew that. So he has, in chapter 5, he's beginning the teaching phase. And he goes up on a mountain in Galilee. Now, Luke says he's on a plane. Matthew says he's up on a mountaintop, and everyone says, oh yes, he's on a mountaintop because it's a depiction of when Moses went up on the mountaintop. So it's kind of like a characterization. So he's in Galilee. Why Galilee? I mean, it wasn't a very important place. It wasn't in the mainstream of the Israeli life. However, it was a trading center. And so people of different backgrounds and ethnicities came to the area and spread diversity. So this is a good place for Jesus to begin, because these people were rejected by the Pharisees and all the high priests of Jerusalem because their diversity made them not Jewish enough. Their blood was not Jewish enough because it was so mixed at this point. So why not? Why not Galilee? The best place, perfect time, perfect people. For Jesus, who has been called the marginal and migrant Messiah. Perfect place for him to share his ministry. So, the scripture we read this morning, the preface to the Sermon on the Mount, had a targeted audience. His first 4 disciples, Andrew, Simon, Peter, James, and John, because they went up with him. So they were who he was really talking to. The gathered crowds that came are not the direct audience, but are presumably the recipients of the divine favor Jesus said God has in store for them. I tried to come up with a title for this reflection. And so I said, Handbook for all ages, because the Beatitudes continue down as a message for us. So Matthew presents Jesus to us as an active agent of God's power and an authoritative teacher. Now, obviously I didn't come up with that on my own. Osvaldo Vena, who was a professor and theologian and writes commentaries for Luther Seminary's workingpreacher.com, has said, Jesus can bless others not because he has possessions that he can dispense. We all know Jesus was poor. Or honor that he can grant. We know he was without honor in that society. But because he is actually aware of God's presence, which he mediates as a broker to others. Challenging the theology of Israel originating in Jerusalem, Jesus became rather unpopular, to say the least. Jesus blessed those who were despised by the society of the time. He turned the values of his time on its head, or their heads, I guess, by declaring that God blesses the unblessed, not the social structure in which they reside. Jesus revalues what has been devalued. He honors what has been shamed. The Beatitudes are the preamble for the way in which Jesus will interpret the law and how he will conduct his ministry. And it is presented right here. Now, the 8 Beatitudes were part of our column prayer at the beginning. Let's explore a bit more closely. Beatitude comes from the Latin word beatitudo, which means blessedness. Beatitude means to be blessed, prosperous, or abundant. The Beatitudes are comprised of 3 elements: proclaiming the blessing. Blessed are those who. Indicating who is blessed: the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst. So we have that they're blessed. We know who's blessed. And now we have to go through why they are blessed. So many people who heard Jesus speak the Beatitudes were also a part of this particular time and culture and felt that the words he spoke reinforced their core beliefs of truth that they believed, truths that they held that were inherent to their life. Despite personal choices, background, history, and experiences, Jesus challenged the disciples to show love, compassion, and hope to others. This was not spoken as a path to salvation, but described as a way of life for the followers of Jesus. Jesus didn't bless the poor and the marginalized because he felt they should be happy in their hardship and hunger, even though they were spiritually rich. No, it was an indictment on the society of the time for having forgotten the responsibility toward neighbors. It was a warning to God's people that there was something fundamentally wrong when God blesses those whom you curse. Jesus outspokenly questioned how the religious and political leaders of the time interpreted God's expectations. Through visions, elaborations, illustrations, and examples about life in the empire of God and how it should be lived, Jesus presents a clear contrast with Rome's empire. Now, you've heard me talk about empire before. We usually categorize empire as the Roman Empire or any other empire. Empire is a form of government. It's a structure of how the government operates and the people who are subjugated to it. Draw any parallels that you wish. There are many ways to interpret the Beatitudes. Character principles that demonstrate individual piety. Be humble. Expressions of human emotions. Happy are those. God's action in the political empire to show a lack of favor to the privileged, powerful, but to the oppressive poor who are deprived but struggling for justice. The language is plural. The poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst. The first 4 Beatitudes name oppressive situations in which God's empire is at work to reverse the damage imposed by Rome's policies and practices. Now, I found it interesting, obviously something I never knew, that Luke only presents 4 Beatitudes, the first 4. while Matthew continues through 5 more. Now, Luke was our social action gospel writer. That might be why he wanted to emphasize that. I have to find where I am. In case you haven't figured it out, my eyes are bothering me this morning. Found this interesting. The poor and oppressed. About 70 to 80% of the population at that time. People who struggled for material resources, experienced food insecurities, lived in urban situations where overcrowding was common, diseases prevalent, and violence a familiar visitor. These first 4 Beatitudes proclaim God's blessing on those entangled in situations and practices of exploitation. They promise divine reversals in both the present and the future. I prefer that we call it God's kingdom, K-I-N-D-O-M, as opposed to kingdom. The next 5 Beatitudes, found in Matthew 7 through 12, name human actions that express God's transforming and challenging guidelines for a just world. They identify distinctive practices: doing mercy, being pure in heart, making peace, being persecuted, and being condemned. Who are the merciful? People who give of their resources and take care of the marginalized. Rome and empire in different times and places show no mercy, but need to expand their rule and heavily tax the population, leading people into a struggle for survival. God's rule is different. In God's kingdom, all will be welcome and will have plenty. Who are the pure in heart? Those who follow the will of God and the doing of the will of God. Those who commit to God thoroughly without hypocrisy will see God. Who are the peacemakers? The people who implement God's will, not the will of the empire. Coercion through threat and violence enforced empires rule. Entry into God's kingdom is voluntary. Blessed are those who are persecuted for justice's sake, where people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Who are these people? The life of a disciple of Jesus runs counter to the values of the world then and now. This is not the New Testament days where people were persecuted for confessing Christ. However, look around. When we live our lives seeking justice for the marginalized and the oppressed, extend mercy to the outcast, or we live the values outlined in the Beatitude in today's world, there's a distinct possibility, if we live those values today, that we could be targeted, detained, arrested, like the pastors this past week. However, to be blessed, we must persevere. I, at times, like to compare the Message Bible with our usual NRSVs, CEVs. I'm going to read you the Beatitudes from the Message. Jesus saw his ministry drawing huge crowds. He climbed a hillside. Those who were apprenticed to him, the committed, climbed with him. Arriving at a quiet place, he sat down and taught his climbing companions. This is what he said. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. You're blessed when you feel you're lost. What is most dear to you? You've lost what is most dear to you. I guess you have to decide what is most dear. Only then you can be embraced by the one most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat. You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourself cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and your heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. You're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into God's kingdom. Not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. What it means is that the truth is too close for comfort and they are uncomfortable. You can be glad when that happens. Give a cheer. For though they don't like it, I do. And all of heaven applauds. And know that you are in good companion. My prophets and witnesses have always gotten into this kind of trouble. Thanks be to God for giving us guidelines for this time and place.